innovations, aiming for a better future. Where small steps signal new possibilities. Vibe in Action K Initiative presents the future moment that we are currently passing through. Explore the charm of K-beauty, beauty on and off. We take to the streets to hear about daily beauty routines, get hands-on experience, and share honest reviews. A lively K-beauty expedition for both newbies and pros. Learn and experience K-beauty with two idol stars on a mission to find their own styles.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, June 17th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung joins his global counterparts at this year's expanded G7 summit in France that seeks common ground on issues of mutual interest. Meanwhile, as the U.S. and Iran prepare to sit down in Switzerland this coming Friday to formally sign their MOU for peace, conflicting remarks continue to make headlines with regard to Tehran's nuclear ambitions and a reconstruction fund for its country. Also, U.S. President Donald Trump shares confidence in ending Russian aggression against Ukraine, given his prospects for peace in the Middle East. We start our newscast today in France, where President Lee Jae-myung urged his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump for his support in charting peace on the Korean peninsula. Now, remarks to this end were made during a photo session ahead of the expanded G7 talks. Our Yoon Jung-min files this report from Europe.
World leaders are in the French town of Evian-les-Bains for the gathering of the world's most influential powers. Leaders from the G7 countries were present, including U.S. President Donald Trump, and 5 other leaders were invited, including South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. The host, French President Emmanuel Macron, greeted guests one by one.
How are you, Mr. President? I'm so happy. How are you?
The session began with a group photo during which President Lee met his American counterpart Trump for a short greeting. In the readout, the Blue House said Trump asked Lee about recent developments in inter-Korean relations, and Lee asked Trump to lead a peaceful resolution of issues relating to North Korea, noting Trump's contribution to the recent U.S. Iran peace agreement. Trump reportedly responded positively. Tuesday's session addressed reforming current international development cooperation system, aiming to reduce financial dependency on external assistance and create progress incentives. In line with that, the South Korean president stressed the importance of private capital, introducing a recent case where South Korea helped Indonesia secure private investment worth $50 million through its financial assistance in the agriculture and energy sectors. President Lee pitched his vision for a global AI-basic society, where the fruits of AI technology are shared with all countries, and he also brought up the need to bolster vocational training in developing nations. At the summit, the group of 7 leaders adopted 3 joint statements on mutually beneficial international partnerships, a coordinated response to recent Ebola outbreak, and the fight against cancer. Later in the day, the leaders joined a social dinner and a concert in the small French town, which sits on the southern shore of Lake Geneva.
President Lee says his attendance at the G7 for the second consecutive year demonstrates the trust and expectations of the international community, vowing to safeguard national interests and fulfill South Korea's responsible role on the global stage. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Geneva.
That being said, President Lee Jae-myung sought to sit down separately with his G7 counterparts to share thoughts on bilateral interests. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin covers his discussions with the leaders of Canada and Germany.
President Lee Jae-myung's summit diplomacy continued on the sidelines of the G7 summit. On Tuesday, he held back-to-back talks with the leaders of Canada and Germany. President Lee and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney focused on deepening strategic cooperation in defense, security, energy, and critical minerals.
지금은 유사한 입장국으로서 서로에게 도움되는 관계로 양국 관계가 매우 발전하고 있습니다. 우리 서로 협력할 게 많으니까 오늘 어떤 협력을 더 구체적으로 할지 한번 논의해 보기로 하죠.
Since we last met in Korea, our partnerships continue to grow. We're working across defense, across investment, across trade, on all aspects, including on the cultural side. So
According to the Blue House, President Lee said that Korea is prepared to help strengthen Canada's defense capabilities as a trusted partner. Prime Minister Carney responded that Canada places great importance on cooperation with Korea and agreed to continue discussions on related initiatives. The meeting comes as Korea's Hanwha Ocean and Germany's TKMS compete for a multi-billion-dollar submarine contract from Canada. Citing Canada's Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, Politico reported last Saturday that Ottawa expects to select its preferred bidder within 30 days. Before meeting with Prime Minister Carney, President Lee held separate talks with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. High on the agenda was expanding cooperation in the economy, defense, science, and technology sectors, as well as international security.
독일과 대한민국은 많은 영역에서 서로 협력하고 또 협력을 통해 시너지를 만들 수 있는 국가라고 생각합니다.
On defense, the two leaders discussed moving beyond competition toward joint research and development, co-production, and joint entry into third country markets. Chancellor Merz also invited President Lee to the Asia-Pacific Conference of German Business, which will be held in Seoul later this year.
So I'm very much looking forward to my visit to your country by the end of October. We invite you to give a speech and to be part of this important conference.
More bilateral meetings are expected on Wednesday, the final day of this year's G7 summit. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Also on the sidelines of this year's G7 summit, U.S. President Donald Trump took time to tout yet again the U.S.'s peace framework with Iran, claiming that it essentially eliminates Iran's nuclear ambitions. Our Kim Do-yeon covers his remarks.
Iran will be permanently barred from developing or acquiring nuclear weapons under a new framework agreement reached with the United States. That's according to U.S. President Donald Trump at the G7 summit in France on Tuesday as he addressed the U.S. Iran deal to end the war.
Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. That's what it says. It won't have one to buy, to develop. They will not have a nuclear weapon. And I would say that's about 99.9% of what I wanted, because we couldn't let that happen.
The Memorandum of Understanding also secures immediate halt of the 15-week conflict and the permanent, toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil supply route. President Trump noted that the deal has already begun impacting global markets.
The ships are starting to move nicely. Oil is starting to go, and the prices are coming down rapidly. Stock market is going up rapidly. A lot of good things are happening.
The formal signing ceremony is scheduled for this Friday in Switzerland, after which there will be a 60-day period to finalize the treaty. According to multiple reports, a $300 billion private investment vehicle named the Reconstruction and Development Fund has been established to rebuild Iran. Reuters reports that more than half of that sum has already been committed by international corporations, including firms from South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and the United States. The White House and Vice President J.D. Vance emphasized that the fund is entirely private, utilizing zero U.S. government grants, taxpayer money, or state reparations. The fund remains strictly separate from parallel negotiations regarding the lifting of primary U.S. sanctions and the release of frozen Iranian sovereign assets, and it will not become operational until a final treaty is signed. 김도현, Arirang News.
And as mentioned in that report, the U.S and Iran are poised to formally pen their memorandum of understanding in Switzerland this coming Friday. But Israel's continued military strikes against the Hezbollah in Lebanon look to derail broader regional peace efforts. Our Shin So-eun explains.
Following the electronic signing of an interim agreement, the United States and Iran will formally sign their Armistice Memorandum of Understanding in Bürgenstock, Switzerland on Friday. According to Swiss authorities, the venue was moved from Geneva to the secluded Alpine location with the mountain resort overlooking Lake Lucerne in central Switzerland. The new location comes at the request of the U.S., Iran, and the Middle East mediators to offer tighter securities and protection. Regarding the release of the agreement, President Donald Trump says it will be made public within a couple of days and that he plans to submit the document to Congress for review. But administration officials say the delay is deliberate.
So there are some diplomatic protocols, Sean. There are some sequencing that the Pakistanis have been involved in this, the Qataris have been involved in this. And what the president has said is the agreement will come out on Friday. He may decide to release the agreement sooner than that. But we have this formal ceremony on Friday, and that's when the president right now wants to release the memorandum.
Despite efforts to finalize a peace deal in Lebanon, where a ceasefire remains one of Tehran's key demands, violence has yet to be halted. Israeli drone strike killed at least 4 people on Tuesday as clashes between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah militia continued. In response, Trump publicly rebuked and urged Israel to scale back its military campaign against Hezbollah. Accusing Israeli strikes on Beirut of jeopardizing his peace efforts with Tehran, Trump added that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should show greater restraint and responsibility with Lebanon. The continued fighting in Lebanon has become a growing source of tension between the two leaders, with Iran making a ceasefire there a key condition of the broader peace agreement. Shin So-eun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has voiced confidence in ending Russian aggression against Ukraine, given his prospects of peace in the Middle East. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
President Donald Trump said Tuesday that he wants to turn his attention to ending the war in Ukraine after reaching a framework agreement with Iran, and told reporters that the Middle East issue will soon be in the rear-view mirror. Speaking on the sidelines of the Group of Seven summit in France, Trump said he had a very good meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and planned to meet him again later in the day. Trump said he would do whatever he could to help bring an end to the conflict and urged Russia to negotiate a settlement. The U.S. leader noted that both Russia and Ukraine have suffered heavy losses during the war and stressed that a deal should be reached as soon as possible.
Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people, and so has Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers between the two of them.
Ukraine continues to demonstrate its ability to strike targets deep inside Russia, using drones and missiles to put growing pressure on the Kremlin, while Moscow has vowed to carry out what it calls systematic attacks on Ukraine. Early Monday, Russian forces launched a series of deadly attacks on Kyiv, including an attack that set fire to a historic monastery. Despite the ongoing challenges, Trump struck an optimistic tone, saying he had productive conversations with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Zelensky ahead of the summit. He added that there may now be an opportunity to make progress toward ending the war as diplomatic efforts gain renewed attention from world leaders gathered at the G7. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news now, a former White House official during the first Trump administration says Seoul and Washington should seek to forge a civil nuclear partnership in response to the current environment of geopolitics. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young covers his remarks.
Washington shouldn't waste any time in strengthening its energy security and industrial base by expanding civil nuclear cooperation with Korea, a trusted ally. That's according to Vice Chair of America First Policy Institute Fred Fleitz, who says Seoul has earned broader rights to develop peaceful nuclear technology.
President Trump decided it was time to modernize this relationship. We're not there yet in terms of giving South Korea access to the full nuclear fuel cycle, but obviously we're moving in that direction. I think it's a good development.
His comments come as Seoul and Washington this month held their first round of negotiations on Korea's rights to uranium enrichment, spent fuel reprocessing, and civil nuclear cooperation. Korea operates one of the world's most advanced nuclear power industries, with reactor technology exported to the UAE and selected for an $18 billion project in the Czech Republic. Meanwhile, the US is racing to rebuild domestic fuel supply chains as AI and data centers drive up demand for power, which the Electric Power Research Institute says could consume up to 9% of US electricity by 2030. However, Washington has limited capacity to produce fuel for next-generation reactors, relying on Russia for roughly one-third of its enrichment services as of 2023. Fleitz argues Korea could help address such challenges. Yet, outdated restrictions stand in the way.
The Netherlands, Brazil, and Argentina can make their own nuclear fuel rods, but South Korea cannot. That makes no sense. Japan and India can reprocess spent fuel rods. Now, if we can trust India and Brazil and Argentina with the sensitive nuclear technology, obviously South Korea can be trusted. And South Korea is
Some non-proliferation experts have long opposed the spread of enrichment and reprocessing technologies. But Fleitz points to Korea's record of responsible nuclear stewardship.
And they don't want nuclear technology spreading to nations who may use them for weapons purposes. South Korea is clearly not one of them. It has a model record in abiding by its nuclear treaty obligations.
The former Trump advisor says deeper cooperation would benefit both countries as they seek reliable energy supplies and resilience in critical industries.
Because I believe that South Korean companies are on the brink of some remarkable discoveries and new innovations that will produce significant amounts of fuel at much lower cost with much less waste and will reduce the need for carbon fuel.
Korean officials say Seoul and Washington could hold a second round of negotiations as early as July. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
For the country. So I think.
The Bank of Korea believes consumer prices here will remain high throughout the year as the heavy burden of energy costs is expected to linger longer. Our Baek Joo-hee reports.
Korea's consumer inflation will hover around 3% in the second half of this year, according to the Bank of Korea's biannual inflation review report released on Wednesday. Core inflation is also forecast to reach the mid to high 2% range. Even looking ahead to next year, the central bank expects both headline and core inflation to continuously exceed its target stability level of 2%.
It will likely take a long time for energy supply chains to normalize to previous levels and for global oil prices to stabilize.
Taking a closer look at this year's inflation path, consumer prices started the year stable at 2%. However, the trend sharply reversed following the outbreak of the Middle East conflict, with May inflation bounding back to 3.1%. A key concern for policymakers is a lingering impact of high energy costs. The central bank notes that even if global oil prices cool, the indirect effects of high energy costs typically take about 6 months to fully fit into other manufactured goods and processed foods, and can persist for up to a year. Adding fuel to the fire is an unprecedented surge in corporate bonuses within the booming IT and semiconductor sectors.
Wage hikes also risk further intensifying upward inflationary pressures from both the cost and demand sides.
The central bank warns that when top-tier bonuses are heavily concentrated in specific industries, it elevates reference wages nationwide. This creates general wage hike pressures across other sectors, which eventually stimulates demand-side inflation by adding an extra 0.05 percentage points to consumer prices. The governor of the central bank dismissed speculations of a potential big step interest rate hike, drawing a clear line by saying it was a measure brought up only when the market conditions were tough. 백주희, Arirang News.
Also, on the local front, Korean retail investors poured over $800 million to secure SpaceX shares during the company's first day of trading. According to relevant officials here on this Wednesday, individual investors purchased a net $808 million worth of SpaceX shares on June 12th through 11 brokerage firms. The buying spree followed SpaceX's Nasdaq debut and marked one of the largest single-day purchases of a single U.S. stock by Korean retail investors. Meanwhile, on the entertainment front, K-drama series Teach You a Lesson has topped the Netflix non-English TV show chart for a second week in a row. According to official findings as of this Wednesday, the series had amassed 21.1 million views between June 8th and June 14th. It also topped the charts in 46 countries. Based on a popular webtoon, the series follows a fictional government agency created to defend teachers' rights and restore order within the academic arena. A prestigious culinary school in Paris says French interest in Korean temple food has been gaining greater traction in recent times as a growing number of people seek mindful eating. Our culture correspondent Park Gon-woo files this report from the ground.
Korean temple food continues to grow in popularity, especially in France, one of the world's gastronomic capitals. At prestigious culinary school Le Cordon Bleu Paris, the centuries-old Korean tradition has been taught for a decade. And according to the school's top chef, demand is continuing to grow as more people seek healthier and more balanced diets.
People have become increasingly concerned about the health and purity of what they eat. This has led to a growing interest in temple food. Fermentation, which brings probiotics and plays an important role in a healthy, balanced diet. And temple food, in particular, gives us a very different vision of ingredients and what a balanced diet can be.
The growing global interest comes as Korea's Buddhist community is pushing to have temple food recognized as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. Rifer believes the tradition deserves the recognition.
What UNESCO has recognized in France is not simply food, but its culinary tradition. It's about families gathering around the table and sharing a moment together. Korean temple food, with its focus on balance, health, and spirituality, also deserves recognition as a heritage. It is not just food, but a living cultural tradition.
Looking ahead, Le Cordon Bleu Paris plans to deepen its cooperation with Korea's culinary community. So this year marks the 140th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and France. Do you see any opportunities for deeper cooperation between the school and Korea?
Diplomacy is also culinary diplomacy and cultural exchange. This year, there will be more demonstrations on Korean temple food open to the public. We also have big premises at the very heart of Paris set to be open for workshops and demonstrations of Korean temple food.
From Paris to Seoul, the school says Korean cuisine will continue to serve as a bridge between the two countries, deepening cultural exchange and mutual understanding. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News, Paris.
Temperatures climbed above 30 degrees Celsius across most parts of the country again today, bringing hot daytime conditions. Amid the heat, this year's first heat advisory will take effect at 11 a.m. tomorrow for Gyeongsan, Yecheon, and Guni in the Gyeongsangbuk-do Province and Daegu area. The heat also helped trigger scattered showers. Through early tomorrow morning, showers are expected in many inland areas nationwide. The amount of rainfall will range from 5 to 60 millimeters, and some areas could see gusty winds, lightning, and even hail. A few inland areas may see additional showers tomorrow. 5 to 30 millimeters are expected during the afternoon. As for temperatures, most areas will start the day at around 20 degrees. Seoul 21 degrees, Chuncheon 19 degrees, Daegu 21 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 31 degrees, Daegu at 33 degrees, Busan 28 degrees. Another round of rain is forecast for southern regions and Jeju Island on Friday and Saturday. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at the SAR here in South Korea. Coming up next, our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
The world is no longer connected.
We are moving in different directions.
How far and fast can this actually go?
No more declarations.
We need to turn these promises into reality.
It's breaking apart.
If everything is divided, can we still find peace?
This is how we reinvent cooperation.
얘들아 잠깐만 우리 뭐 좀 까먹은 거 같지 않아?
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
안녕하세요. 방크에서 활동하는 박지은 연구원입니다. 한글은 600년의 역사를 가진 우리나라 고유의 문자인데요. 한글에 대해 잘 모르는 분도 많고 또 잘못된 정보를 접한 분도 꽤 있더라고요. 사이버 외교사절 딴 방크의 일원으로서 제가 한글에 대한 올바른 정보를 전달해 드릴게요. 한글은 조선 4대 왕인 세종대왕이 1443년에 창제한 글자예요. 한글은 자음과 모음으로 구성되어 있는데요. 자음은 입술, 이, 목구멍과 같이 발음기관의 모양이나 그 움직임을 본떠 만들었고요. 사람을 본떠 만들었답니다. 한글의 창제 원리와 사용법을 써놓은 훈민정음 해례본은 1962년 대한민국 국보로 지정되었고 1997년 유네스코 세계기록유산으로 등재되었습니다. 창적이고 과학적이며 아름다운 문자인 한글, 한국인의 위대한 문화유산입니다. 한국 바로 알리기. 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
Members of this year's G7 summit are seeking common ground amid a host of geopolitical concerns, and President Lee Jae-myung, for his part, has asked his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump for his lead in paving peace on the Korean Peninsula. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Wednesday, June 17th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. President Lee Jae-myung and his counterparts at this year's expanded Group of 7 discussions have declared to promote mutually beneficial international partnerships for shared prosperity and stability. For more on this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German press agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, it's been such a long time. Great to have you here.
Great to be back, yeah.
I also have independent journalist Kelly Kasudis-Cho with us. Kelly, welcome back.
Happy to be here, thanks.
Fabian, we start with you. Let's begin with details of the discussions and the joint declarations thus far at this year's Group of 7 summit in France.
Yeah, I would say it's rather surprising that actually joint declarations indeed were signed. That was not really clear beforehand, especially with Trump being the president. I mean, he gave quite ambivalent signals that he doesn't really believe in those multilateral institutions. But now we have joint declarations, actually quite interesting joint declarations. And just the fact itself that they were signed is a message of unity. It shows that G7 meetings still make sense. There's still some weight to it. And yeah, the biggest issues were of geopolitical nature. And the single biggest issue, in my opinion, is the ongoing war in Ukraine. The G7 head of states signed a declaration where it said that Russia would face new sanctions if it would not engage in meaningful peace negotiations, if it would not accept a ceasefire. That is really powerful, especially because it's backed also by the United States. And maybe for South Korea, also interestingly, was that the North Korea issue was also mentioned. Basically, there was again a commitment to full denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. I mean, basically, North Korea should denuclearize. And it was also mentioned regarding the Indo-Pacific that the Taiwan issue should be resolved peacefully, that there should not be any change of status quo by force, but it should be peaceful. So all in all, I would say it was quite interesting, and yeah, I would say it was also successful.
Right, indeed. Kelly, among the joint declaration statements, which ones would you choose to highlight from this year's G7 summit and why?
Well, I've got to be honest, I think a lot of them were quite expected, and there wasn't necessarily much that was revolutionary coming out of the several joint statements other than the points that Fabian mentioned. So they put out a joint declaration on, for instance, the Ebola outbreak, which has been in international headlines for a while now. I think that's a good place to cooperate, considering the fact that U.S. aid has been defunded, and it's getting harder and harder for American, dollars to get into these countries and help support their healthcare systems. There was a joint declaration on cancer research, on drug trafficking, as well as stopping illegal migration or human trafficking. All of that, I think, are pretty benign issues that all G7 parties can agree upon, right? There's nothing too counter-revolutionary there. But obviously, foreign policy was really the crown jewel of all the joint declarations. So as Fabian mentioned, particularly on Ukraine, I thought the mention of Taiwan was very interesting, that there was a line basically saying that in the Indo-Pacific, they want to make sure that there's a peaceful way of resolving this issue. And they specifically mentioned Taiwan as well as the South China Sea. And then again, it's interesting to see, I mean, obviously South Korea was a major player at the G7, but it's interesting to see a joint declaration about North Korea as well. It suggests that it's business as usual, but to see major world powers mentioning North Korea at all, given that we just saw potentially an end to the war with Iran and a lot of conflict still going on with Ukraine and Russia, it was interesting. It almost felt a little off topic in a way, but it could suggest, maybe that foreign policy will go elsewhere. I will say that I did get the sense, I wasn't there obviously, but I got the sense based on the language that there was a desire to kind of ingratiate President Trump for wrapping up the Iran issue. I think they called it an opportunity for peace, right? So this just happened. It was almost treated as if, who knows if fighting will continue. This is a tentative deal. But I think that's ultimately what he as a U.S. president was looking for. I mean, we can't forget that he started this war more or less, and that he's been kind of gunning for a Nobel Peace Prize this whole time. So I think he wanted to come into this meeting getting a pat on the back, and he got that, whether it's genuine or not, and that was able to, pivot the conversation to other areas of cooperation.
Right, and beyond the multilateral G7 meeting, Fabian, President Lee Jae-myung sat down separately with his German counterpart, Friedrich Merz. What did they address?
Yeah, actually, Lee Jae-myung was quite busy also talking to head of states on the sidelines, among them Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor. And what we know from the statements, I mean, it was not really headline grabbing, but I think it was important that they talked. Lee Jae-myung said that he hopes the two countries will work together to advance bilateral ties to a new level. Friedrich Merz said that South Korea is highly regarded in Germany. That was interesting because it's basically alludes to the fact that Korea has a very strong soft power, especially among the young people, the music, the dramas, also beauty products, all that comes with it, that basically, enhances the reputation of South Korea. We all know that, but I think it was interesting that the German chancellor said that. And he will actually come to visit South Korea probably by the end of October, and he's looking forward to that. That's what Merz said. And why is it important that those two head of states are talking? Well, they are pretty much in a similar situation. Both are quite important middle powers who have to adjust to a changing U.S. ally who becomes more, unreliable. They also have to adjust to a China that becomes economically more competitive and politically more assertive. And they are both democratic partners, value partners, so they can learn from each other. And I think they have a lot of win-win situations going on. And I think that Lee Jae-myung is more interested in German issues and vice versa. I think that shows that they have an interest to grow together.
Right, indeed. Kelly, President Lee Jae-myung and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump also managed to exchange a few words during a group photo session, I believe. Do tell us more.
Yeah, a few words is a good description. In fact, I think the amount of time I will spend answering this question will probably exceed the amount of time that President Yi and Trump spent talking together. But basically, from what we know, was that President Yi made yet another bid for President Trump to do something about the North Korea issue. I think the exact language was something along the lines of do something like you did with Iran, right? Help us get on the path to peace here. I'm not surprised that if you've got 30 seconds to talk to Donald Trump, that that's what you would choose. I am a little skeptical of whether or not President Yi's message will be clear. I think Trump has been putting out a lot of fires with the Middle East. And now, of course, this meeting seems to show that their interest is actually next onto Ukraine and Russia. And North Korea has been kind of this long-standing chronic issue that presidents have been kicking the can down the road. So while President Trump in the past has shown interest in this, I don't know if he necessarily sees this as an issue where he can have a win, right? He certainly can't bomb a North Korean weapons depot without consequence and then start a war and then turn around and say, look, I've struck a peace deal, right? It's not quite that simple because China is a major player in this. Russia and North Korea have been having closer relations as of late. So anyway, with 30 seconds that he had, he certainly used them to their fullest. It's probably better to talk about North Korea than any kind of squabbling over the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement or other disagreements that have been going on between Washington and Seoul. So.
Right, and speaking about North Korea, Fabian, this past Saturday, a picture posted by Mr. Trump on his social media platform actually sparked quite a bit of speculation here in South Korea about a potential resumption of talks between the U.S. and North Korea. Could you tell us more about that picture and your takeaways?
Yeah, sure. The picture is from 2018, and it was taken in Singapore during the first U.S.-North Korea summit. And President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the head of state from North Korea, were walking in the garden where they were meeting, where the summit was held. And indeed, that was historic because it was for the first time that a North Korean president was meeting the U.S. president, a dream that already Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, was dreaming of, that he wanted to be recognized as equals. And at that time, there was a lot of hope that, this rapprochement would lead to a new peace initiative and an attempt to denuclearize North Korea. In the end, it failed. But I mean, it was interesting that Trump was posting this picture. Why did he do that totally out of context? I mean, I would assume that he has interest in meeting Kim Jong-un again. Also, we know from South Korean politicians, the prime minister also said that Trump mentioned to him that he wanted to meet Kim Jong-un again. But is it going to happen? I don't think so, because right now North Korea, Kim Jong-un is very closely engaging with China, closely engaging with Russia. Both countries deliver a lot of economic help, security guarantees. North Korea right now doesn't need to engage with the US or with any other Western country. North Korea is in a pretty comfortable spot right now. The economy is, I mean, on a low level, but still running quite well for North Korean standards. They have Russia, which also gives them security guarantees. China doesn't enforce sanctions anymore. So basically, North Korea has what it wants, and I don't see that Trump has a lot of room to engage with North Korea in a meaningful way. So count me skeptical, but who knows what will happen. I mean, I wouldn't rule out the possibility, and certainly it would be in the interest of South Korea, or at least by the South Korean government, that Trump takes an initiative to basically start a peace process here.
Right, indeed. Mr. Trump has been asked to take on the role of peacemaker as the Lee Jae-myung administration takes the role of pacemaker. Kelly, based on what you said earlier, would I be right in assuming that you believe the prospects of a Trump-Kim summit within this year is not that high?
Yeah, that is what I believe. I mean, but never say never, as Fabian said. And one thing, especially with the Trump administration and North Korea, is you've got two wild card governments, if you will. You never know what's going to occur. I will say, talking about this, I get a little bit of deja vu, partly because President Yi's push to engage with North Korea reminds me a lot of when I first got here with President Moon. But on the other hand, circumstances are very different that don't necessarily point to the immediate need or desire for engagement. So it's not 2017 anymore. North Korea is not lobbing intercontinental ballistic missiles into the sea for fun to get attention. Trump is not threatening fire and fury on the peninsula just yet. You don't have this sense that the stakes are really high. In fact, you really get the sense that the stakes are higher between Russia and Ukraine, or what's been going on in the Middle East, which again, it's only been a couple of days. Let's hope that actually stabilizes, right? And then of course, course, the question of Israel's conduct in the future also makes this quite unpredictable. So what I'm trying to say is it doesn't feel like an emergency from an international stage perspective. And meanwhile, these other kind of simmering conflicts could flare up at any point. The other question is whether North Korea is even interested in engaging with South Korea anymore. What do they really stand to benefit from that? I mean, economically, they're still not doing well, but they've been doing better than in a decade ago. They have, as Fabian mentioned, strengthened partnerships with China and Russia. The stakes between the U.S., China, and South Korea are much higher now, which makes it a much more delicate tightrope to walk when you're talking about dealing with North Korea in general. Again, it's probably easier to just kick that can down the road. And then for President Trump, I think any effort to engage would be probably largely self-serving. And the question is this a quick victory that he can turn around and package as like a PR spin to make his administration look better? Or is this going to open a can of worms that's going to make things even messier? I see the reason for why South Korea wants to engage. I don't necessarily see how North Korea or the United States, which unfortunately those two are really the ones with the power in this at the moment, why this would be at the top of their priority list. Maybe if things truly do simmer down elsewhere, boredom or hatching down the to-do list, they might get to it, but I have my doubts, yeah.
Right. Meanwhile, beyond the Korean Peninsula, but staying with the topic of peace, Fabien, what's the latest with regard to Ukraine's hopes of joining the EU?
Well, Ukraine has now officially become, or has entered the first stage of negotiations to become a full member state of the European Union. Now that is more of a symbolic first step, I would say, because this process takes a long time. We talk about 10 plus years, but it has been made possible after there was a change of government in Hungary, because Hungary, or Viktor Orban to be precise, has vetoed this process. And now after Viktor Orban is not the president of Hungary anymore, but now there's Peter Magyar. Now the way is open, but within Europe, this decision is not necessarily popular. It's a little bit controversial because you have to meet certain criteria to become a full member state of the European Union. One is, for example, anti-corruption standards, rule of law. In that regard, I mean, Ukraine has achieved a lot, but is definitely not there yet. So I think it will take a lot of time to really become a full member state of the European Union. But anyway, it's a positive sign. And Ukraine was a big issue in France at the G7 meeting. There was a special session only dedicated to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was flying in and joined that session. And it seems that now, for the first time, maybe after more than 4 years of this full invasion that Russia started, a peace seems maybe not near, but kind of tangible. It seems possible because, this war has been very brutal and neither side is advancing a lot. So I think both sides probably will realize soon that it needs to end, and certainly Ukraine is willing to. Russia so far has not shown any real meaningful interest, at least not to some realistic terms. I mean, Russia maybe also wants to end this conflict, but on very different terms than what the European countries wanted to end. So it's still complicated, but I would say for Ukraine, the G7 meeting was probably a successful meeting.
Right, and staying with the prospects of peace for Ukraine, Kelly, prior to his departure for the G7 summit, U.S. President Donald Trump spoke about speaking separately on the phone with his counterparts in Ukraine and in Russia. What's been shared about those talks?
The information on those talks are quite sparse, and a lot of it is coming out of actually the Kremlin. But according to Russian state media, at least, on Trump's 80th birthday, he's 80, everyone, Putin and Trump spoke on the phone for, quote, just under an hour. President Trump reiterated that Russia needs to end the war in Ukraine, and that was about all we know. I do think it's interesting, a lot of the discussion today has been about Ukraine. This is really different than the kind of wavering support that we saw for Ukraine in the last couple of years. At the beginning of the conflict, the United States was really fully behind Ukraine, and then within Congress, as well as at the highest levels of the Oval Office, there was a little bit of dithering and kind of a weaker signal of support. So now it seems like things are quite doubling down. I don't know if it's really that President Trump wrapped up his priorities in Iran and therefore he wants to switch his attention to this, or if, like Fabian says, he sees some kind of opportunity where the conflict on both sides is starting to fizzle out a little bit and no one's really making any progress. And now it might be a matter of trying to find an off-ramp that can save Putin some face, as well as give the Ukrainians the liberation that they're looking for from Russian occupation. So, that's a tough one. And then with Zelensky, his office basically said that he had a phone call with President Trump on his birthday. I don't think it's clear necessarily how long that call is. It sounds trite. These kinds of calls are important for maintaining a certain level of respect and diplomacy, but whether or not they mean the needle is being moved tangibly in one direction or not, I don't know. But when you look at North Korea, for instance, you have to say, I mean, any kind of dialogue or exchange of goodwill or pleasantries is probably better than none, right? So in this case, it sounds like those were worth noting, but we just don't really know the content of those conversations.
Right, and because we don't know the content, there are so many questions and so few answers then. All right, Kelly, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Fabian, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow for more panel discussion regarding the economy.
It is not extravagant.